Let's ask the community.
Equity Mates.
Hey, Equity
Hi,
Mate.
I just had a question.
Hey, Bryce, friend. I've got a question.
Today's question is from Tavake. Let's give it a listen.
Hey, Equity Mates. Tavaki here. Love the show. Just had a question about hedged versus non-hedged ETFs and what your thoughts were on them. If you guys could just go through pros and cons and talk about how you would incorporate it into your portfolio. Thanks for your help.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the question, Tavake. And a reminder, if you would like to ask a question and leave us a voice note, there will be a link in the description and show notes. So please, we'd love to hear from you. But Ren, let's get into it. Let's start firstly with what is hedged.
Yes.
We need to answer that part of the question.
Yes. So when you're buying assets in an overseas market, you're buying them in the local currency.
Yes.
So classic example, if you're buying US shares, you have to convert your money to US dollars to buy it. And if you're buying ETF units of a S&P 500 ETF, you might not actually be physically changing your money to US dollars, but the ETF provider is changing money to US dollars and then buying US assets. Now that introduces currency risk where you're not only getting the benefit or the loss of what you invest in, but also the fluctuations between the currency that you bought the asset in and your home currency.
Yeah.
So in that example, the difference between US and Aussie dollar could either enhance or erode the gains that you make on the investment you make. So ETF issuers, to manage that challenge, have hedged ETF products where they hedge the currency risk and essentially take it out of the price. And so the movement of a hedged ETF is just the movement of the underlying asset that you've invested in, whereas an unhedged ETF gives you the movement of both the underlying asset and also the fluctuations in currency.
I guess the question then becomes, if we're making an investment decision, we are often presented with hedged and unhedged options.
Yep.
So what are the pros, what are the cons when it comes to hedging?
So I think there's one big argument for each. So the argument for hedged is that your exposure is only to what you're investing in.
Yes.
And so your returns or your losses will be purely dictated by the thing that you've actually invested in, not by currency.
Yeah.
So that's the argument for hedging. The argument against hedging is that hedged products often have higher fees. And we've pulled out some examples to give you a sense. 3 ETFs are the IOO, Global 100 by iShares. Unhedged, 40 basis points, 0.4%. Hedged, which is IHOO, 0.43. For global shares, VGS by Vanguard, 0.18% is unhedged, 0.21% is the hedged version of that ETF. And similarly, if we just want to invest in the US S&P 500, we can look at IVV, 0.04% unhedged, 0.1% hedged. So to wrap that all up, I guess the premium for hedging, the extra fees you pay for hedging, 3 basis points for the first one, 3 basis points for the second one, 6 basis points for the third one.
Yeah.
Which is pretty small in the scheme of things, but the fees are higher.
Yeah. Okay, so let's say I'm okay with that, okay with paying a premium. We then need to look at the performance side of things because
I mean, that's all that matters.
Yeah, right? They're not going to both perform the same. So using some of the examples that you just spoke about, let's have a look at how they have performed over the years. So let's look at the US ETFs, IVV, and the hedged version, IHVV. Over the past 5 years, IVV has returned 15.4% per annum. The hedged version, so taking out the currency exposure, is 12.8% per annum. Now that's a reasonable difference over a fair chunk of time.
Definitely, yeah.
Outperformance of about 2.5-3%. The global, so VGS, and then the hedged VGAD over the last 10 years, VGS is 13.7% per annum and VGAD is 10.5% per annum. People are probably thinking, how is that the case? Well, you're getting exposure to the US dollar.
Yeah.
That's why.
The US dollar has strengthened against the Aussie, and that's boosted the returns.
Yes.
The takeaway there, though, isn't that it's better. You get better returns with unhedged. The takeaway that we want to leave you with is that you get different ones outperform at different times. Unfortunately, there's not a clean answer to say one does better. And the reason why that is the case is because when you're going hedged, you still are, in a way, making a bet on the Australian dollar.
Yeah.
You're saying the Aussie dollar will do better, and so I want to hedge out the risk of, the US dollar falling against the Aussie dollar. And that might be confusing to think about conceptually, but just the takeaway is, if you look at a long time horizon, over different medium-term periods, so sort of like 5 to 10 year periods, sometimes the hedged version has done better, sometimes the unhedged version has done better. So in the late 90s and 2013 to now, the Aussie dollar was falling as global equities rose, which meant the unhedged version did better. And that's what the examples you gave us before, the unhedged version had done better. However, that's not always the case, because between 2001 and 2013, the Aussie dollar was rising as global equities were also rising, meaning that the hedged version would have done better because the Aussie dollar was strengthening and the other foreign currencies were falling.
Yeah.
But you know what the good news is, Bryce? Over the long term, the studies find it doesn't really matter. As currencies fluctuate, this is research from BetaShares that we can include in the show notes. They found that over the last 25 years, hedged and unhedged versions have generally broadly similar returns.
Generally broadly similarly. Well, that's good news for those sitting here freaking out that they might have made the wrong decision with their ETFs when they did have a choice of hedged v unhedged. But Ren, to close out, there is one area of investing, I guess, or one asset class where it's probably worth paying a little bit more attention to in doing the research, and that is commodities.
Yeah, I think when you're trying to invest in an asset that's trying to hedge risk of inflation and stuff like that, you probably want to not have a currency hedged version of it. Let's look at two examples. The BetaShares Gold Bullion ETF currency hedged, QAU, versus the Global X Physical Gold ETF. So that one is not hedged.
Yeah.
The BetaShares version, QAU, over the past 10 years, it's returned 4.8% a year. The Global X version has done more than double that, 10.1% per year.
Yeah, massive difference there.
Massive difference.
Yeah. Now, I guess just to really put a bow on it, how do we approach this? From my point of view, I do have some hedged ETFs in my portfolio, but it wasn't because I wanted to hedge. It was because at the time they were the only options available for what I wanted, and that those were my geared ETFs. Otherwise, as the studies kind of show, for me, it doesn't really make a massive difference.
Yeah, I don't think about it too much. The only thing I would say is there's an argument that if you're trying to get global exposure to different asset classes and diversify yourself globally, there is also an argument that diversifying currency risk as well isn't a bad idea, just because so much of our lives are tied to the Aussie dollar in terms of that's what we get paid in and all of that stuff. And if the Aussie dollar strengthens, great. We're getting paid in a currency that's stronger, and we own assets, in Australia, and the currency is stronger, great. But if the Aussie dollar weakens, at least you've got these overseas investments in foreign currencies and they're worth a bit more. So it's like you're kind of diversifying and hedging your personal currency exposure as well.
Love it. Well, thank you for the question, Tavake. Keep them coming.
Equity mind.
I will say this about investing. Everything you do learn is cumulative. What I learned at 20 is useful.